Hi, everybody, and welcome to another special edition here on quantumplanet.world of Quantum Connections. Now, this interview is very, very timely and is going to be part of our Sacred Earth initiative on QPW. But really, I'm super stoked to be welcomed back into the fold after we did a beautiful interview for the winter solstice that has just passed. The one and only author and Druid, Evert Hopman. Hi, Ellen, how are you? Good. So we did a little piece for our Return of the Light immersion back at the end of 2023. We're recording this particular episode in the spring of 2024. But this is really going to be one of those interviews that you can watch any year, hopefully, because the information is always going to be relevant. So, Ellen, perhaps you could just give our audience a little bit of a background in what you do. And of course, you've written many amazing Druid books. And we're going to be sharing one of those today, which you've written about Imbolc in. But perhaps just, give our audience who don't know who you are a quick overview of what you do.
Okay, well, my name is Evert Hopman, and I live in Massachusetts in the United States. I've been a Druid since 1984, so I've been around the block a few times.
Okay.
And I'm an author. I never can keep track. I think 16 books in print. I'm not sure, but if you go to my website, elleneverthopman.com, you can see the books, or you can go to Amazon and see all the books there. I'm happy to mail books to people in the United States, but it's way too expensive if you're elsewhere. But if you just go to my website, elleneverthopman.com, you can order books or just see the books. And I was, until very recently, I was the Archdruid of a group called Tribe of the Oak, tribeoftheoak.org. If you're interested, we have a training program. I recently handed it over to a new Archdruid, which is thrilling because I founded the group in 2014. And it's been going strong and it's growing. And it was very nice to be able to hand it over to somebody else, which makes me feel successful.
Wow, congratulations. That's a long time. That's nearly a decade, right? And I know, having been friends with Philip Cargom in the UK for many years, he handed over his Druidship to another lady just a couple of years ago now. But the amount of work that was involved in that was astronomical. And so I can only imagine that, it's great to feel a sense of achievement with these things, because that's a long time to keep something going, especially a community over the last decade or so.
Well, before that, I was co-chief of the Order of White Oak, which I co-founded in 1996, and that went until 2014.
Oh my gosh.
So and then before that, I was vice president of the Henge of Keltria, and I've been at this for a long time, so it was very nice to be able to just hand it over and not have to worry. I mean, I'm still there. I'm still there to mentor people and teach and post on Facebook. And we have a public Facebook page, which you can find. Just look up Tribe of the Oak. And we do public rituals also. We just did one for Imbolc. And I actually did a divination. You and I were talking a little bit before this about the coming spring and how important it is. And for the public rituals, I usually am the seer. I do the divinations. And what came up for me was the yew tree, which is a tree of immortality, of birth and rebirth, but it's also about cycles. And what it was saying is that the period that we're entering now, this spring, is actually an old cycle that's happening again. And that what we need to do is we just need to keep our eyes open and watch it as it unfolds, but not to lose hope.
Wow, that message feels very pertinent and relevant, but it's also exactly kind of how I'm understanding that this 2024 could play out with the energies that are coming to the planet. And we're dealing a lot with the sun being in our universe, who's really very active at the moment. And of course, we're passing through the photon belt, so there's a lot more light on the planet. We've also apparently just finished the Kali Yuga, so we've ended another big cycle there. So I completely agree, Ellen. It feels like we've come to the end of many cycles all at once. But what is going to happen next? Well, I think that that's the exciting thing. If we're ready to receive what is coming next, but maybe for some people could also be a little scary. So this is partly why I wanted to do this special video with you at this time, to remind everybody that the spring is the time when the energy of Mother Earth comes back into us fully. It's in the Northern Hemisphere when we start to see the plants like the snowdrops and the bluebells reappear. And personally speaking, Ellen, I always find this time of year, my body starts to receive the energy again from the environment around me after the winter months, which is more sort of, dark and cold and inside, and, there isn't so much energy to use. So where are we going to start? We were talking off camera about when is Imbolc. Exactly, because there's a lot of debate around this, not just Imbolc, in fact, but also Bealtaine, Lunasa, and Samhain. So perhaps we could start with that place and educate our audience about how Imbolc is actually worked out and what it represents to you in the traditions that you're from.
Okay, well, before I get to the timing, I think for people maybe who aren't that familiar with it, I need to explain a little bit about what it is. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, what's happening right now, the light is increasing. Okay, so of course, the ancients, most people were farmers, and they notice what's happening in nature. And a lot of things are happening now. Birds are becoming more active, and they actually start looking for mates, and soon they'll start building their nests, and it's all based on the light, The other thing that happens, and this is the real focus of Imbolc, is that the lambs give birth, or the sheep give birth to lambs. And again, the lambs and the sheep, it's all based on the light. When the light gets to a certain point, the sheep who've been gestating, they give milk. And typically it's around the middle of February. Okay. So Imbolc is actually the middle of February. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. We've gotten used to celebrating on February 1st, and I'm going to explain why that is, but that's not really Imbolc. Okay. So Imbolc is, I call it a festival with two faces, because it's the festival of Bridget, and Bridget is both a saint and a goddess. So for pagans, it's the goddess Bridget, and it's the lambs and the light and the start of spring. For Christians, it's the feast of Saint Bridget, who is also the patron saint of Ireland. And very recently, they made it an official bank holiday that it had never been before. And it's the only official holiday dedicated to a woman. All the other ones are for men, like Patrick, And Patrick and Bridget are roughly contemporary, so that's interesting. But Imbolc was primarily in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. Those were the big areas. So Imbolc is one of 4 fire festivals. The Celtic festivals, which the first festival would be Samhain, which is Halloween. The next one would be Imbolc, which is now. Then comes Bealtaine, which is May Day, and then, then comes Lunasa, and then comes Samhain again. So it's Samhain, Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lunasa, and then Samhain again. That's the cycle. Okay, and those are cross quarters. The solstices and equinoxes are fixed astronomical events, but the cross quarters were always lunar events. And again, I'm going to get into the timing in a little bit, but I just want to keep describing what's going on here. Imbolc became Groundhog Day in the United States. There's also a Polish festival called Gromnice, which is the same time as Imbolc. And it's what they make candles, and Christians call it Candlemas because people used to bring candles to church to be blessed. And the reason it's candles is because the light is returning. But also by the time it gets to be Imbolc, you can do your milking without needing a candle. So, so you're kind of celebrating candles because you don't need one because the light is back. So Imbolc has to do with the sheep giving birth. Beltane or Bjaltana has to do with the blooming of the hawthorn, the May tree. And why that's important is because you don't know if it's warm enough to take your cows up into the hills until the May tree blooms. So you have to wait for that. And that's sometime in mid-May. It's not May 1st, it's mid-May, even though we call it May Day. And then Lunasa is when the grain is ripe, and then Samhain is the end of the harvest. Okay. So Imbolc or Imolg, according to some etymologists, there's some discussion about this, means in the belly. Imbolg, bolg means belly, because the sheep are pregnant. So Imbolg, in the belly, you're celebrating that. The sheep start to give milk about 3 days before the lambs are born. And another name for the festival is Oy Melk, which means use milk. And that was a really big deal. I mean, today, these days, we can go to the supermarket, we can pick up a gallon of milk if we want milk. In those days, there was no milk for months at a time. So the return of the milk was worth a celebration. So that's what this is. And the pagan goddess Bridget, who becomes Saint Bridget, it's really the same creature in two guises. But the pagan goddess Bridget was a triple goddess. This is her festival of poetry, smithcraft, and healing. And there is a tradition of weaving Bridget's crosses. And usually they're made out of rushes. This one is made out of rushes. Ooh. But this is a solar cross. This is not a Christian cross. The Christians like to say that it's a Christian cross, but it's not a Christian cross. A Christian cross has a long base and the short arms. This is an equal-armed solar cross. It represents the sun which is getting stronger, okay? And it's also a swastika. That's what this is. A swastika is a solar symbol. It is a good luck symbol. And this predates Christianity. It's very old. And don't be afraid of the word swastika because it's a very ancient thing that was abused by Herr Hitler. So honor Bridget, honor the sun with your equal-armed solar cross. I also make these sometimes out of straw. If you can't find, fresh reeds are what they use in Ireland. But if you don't have access to reeds, you can use straw, but just make sure you soak it in the bathtub overnight, which is very nice because Bridget was famous for beer. She made bathtub beer. And she was very hospitable. So when people came to visit, she always gave them bathtub beer. So you're actually honoring her by putting the straw in the bathtub. And then the next day, the straw is nice and pliable and you can weave across. So if you're wondering how to do this, you can just Google how to make a Bridget's cross. And there's lots of videos on YouTube and all over the place. So the Bridget's cross is hung over the door. It's placed on the windowsill. It's stuck into the eaves. It protects the house. Some people wear little versions around their neck. Another custom is to make a bridjog. It's called a bridjog, Bridget, og, little. This is a little Bridget. And this is a bride doll. And you can also make one of those by taking a milk churn and decorating a milk churn and make it look like a doll. Typically, or the most powerful thing to do would be to take the last sheaf of the previous harvest and make your brijog out of that. I don't have a wheat field, so what I typically do is I sneak into a farmer's field and I steal the wheat. But the brijog is processed around the house or around the village. accompanied by musicians. And then another thing you can do, well, you can make a bed. I don't want to hold it up, it's too big, but you can make a bride's bed, which you put by the hearth. And this is in Scotland, they do this. They call in Bridget to the house. They tell her she's welcome. They make a bed of straw by the hearth, and they lay the brídeog on the straw and leave it there overnight. And then you look at the ashes in the morning to see if Bridget has been there. And if she's been there, then there's footsteps in the ashes. And that's very good luck. But I've been doing a lot of research into this, and there's a lot more symbolism than is obvious, okay? Because most people think that the brídeog is a baby, it's like a little doll, and you're putting the doll by the hearth. But that's not what this is, okay? You know, the sheep are giving birth at this time. So if you're an agricultural society, you're a farmer, all the sheep are giving birth. So back in the Middle Ages, and probably for thousands of years, when women gave birth, they would put straw, fresh straw, on the floor, and the woman would give birth on the straw. And then after the baby was born, they would take the straw outside and burn it, which makes good sense. You know, you're living in a hut and you've got a mud floor, you know, a packed mud floor, and you put fresh straw down, and the woman gives birth, and then the afterbirth and all that, the blood and all that is on the straw, and you take it outside and burn it. So the straw bed that you're making for Bridget is actually symbolic of a woman giving birth. And Imbolc is 9 months after Beltane or May Day. So you celebrate May Day, you go out in the woods, you carry on with whoever, and then 9 months later, it's Imbolc, which is perfect timing because you got all this milk. So if the woman can't nurse the baby for some reason, there's plenty of milk around, so it's a really good time to have a baby. And that's part of the symbolism there, and I think that's something that's been forgotten. Another thing that you do at Imbolc is on the eve of Imbolc, you take something that's called a brat or a brat. It's a cloak, or it can be just a strip of cloth, and you leave it out overnight so that Bridget can bless it. So when she comes by, she blesses it, and then you can use that for healing all year round. You can also make little strips like ribbons of cloth and leave those out. I actually do that every year. I have a basket, they're called clooties, little cloths. That's Scottish, clooties. You just put out the basket, Bridget blesses them, and then if somebody is sick or if an animal is sick, you can tie the cloth around their neck, around their wrist, and that's very traditional. And I know one Irish woman who puts out her underwear, and she calls it her power panties, so that Bridget can bless her underwear. So if she has a job interview or some scary thing she has to do, she has her power panties for courage. But Imbolc is also a traditional time to visit holy wells, to have a big feast with the family, and obviously because it's a milk festival, it'd be very traditional to have milk dishes, custards, puddings. It's also the time when you test the soil, because it's the time of first plowing. So you have to see if the soil is soft and not frozen. Around here, you can't do that until April or May, but in Ireland, this would be the time. And so we already talked about Candlemas. Okay, so the timing of the festival. These days, people celebrate on February 1st, and they call that Imbolc. So Imbolc Eve, they say, is January 31st. However, the idea of having a festival on the 1st of the month is actually a Roman thing. It's not a Celtic thing. So What happened was when the Romans invaded Gaul, what we call France and parts of Germany and so on, they brought this custom because the first of the month for the Romans was sacred to Juno, the goddess Juno, and they always made offerings on the first of the month, and that was called the calends of the month. That's where we get the word calendar. And and so the Celts had a lunar calendar. They went by the moon. But the Romans, being very organized, they said, oh, no, you got to have your festival on the first of the month. So that's why we now think of May Day as May 1st. We think of Imbolc as February 1st. We think of Lunasa as August 1st. We think of Samhain as, well, the Celts started the day in the evening. So we think of it as October 31st, but November 1st. And that's not the way the Celts did it at all. Okay, so Imbolc, first of all, is not Imbolc until the sheep give birth. So I went around here years ago and I asked the local farmers, I said, when do the sheep give birth? And they said, oh, February 15th, usually. And I said, well, that's interesting, and I kind of filed that away. So it's not really Imbolc until mid-February, I thought to myself. And then May Day, it's not really May Day until the hawthorns bloom, because the blooming of the hawthorn tells you that it's time to move the cows up to the sheilings, to the hills. So I kept an eye on the local hawthorns. I planted hawthorns from seeds that I brought back from Ireland, and being a Druid, I had to keep an eye on the hawthorns. Guess when they bloom? They bloom mid-May. Mid-May, not May 1st. So I said, that's interesting. And so in my thinking as a Druid, mid-May is May Day. Mid-February is actually Imbolc. Well, lo and behold, I only found this out a week ago, and I've been operating under this assumption for years now. But in Britain, the Calendar Act of 1750 brought the Gregorian calendar into use. Before that, it was Julian, so that Britain would be in line with the rest of Europe. In the process, 11 days were lost. On Wednesday, September 2nd, 1752, was followed by Thursday, September 14th, 1752. So they lost 11 days, but apparently all the workers got paid, which was very nice. They got paid for all the lost days. So what that means is Imbolc, or what the Christians call Candlemas, would have been on St. Valentine's Eve.
Wow. That's fascinating, all of that information, Ellen. And we are having some internet connections, so hopefully this is coming through. But I was reading about those 11 days also recently and thinking, isn't that weird how suddenly 11 days of our past have been removed?
Right. Well, I mean, Armistice Day is November 11th, right? And that's when we're supposed to honor the dead from World War I and all. Guess when Samhain was?
Well, it's 11 days before that, right? And
No,
technically.
Samhain is November 11th.
No, Samhain is November the 11th.
If you go by the original calendar.
I get right.
Because
so this is where things are really confusing about our past, right? Because I've also participated in ceremonies on Samhain, many over the years, and I can definitely testify that I experienced the wild hunt in the astral planes happening. So this is why I've got so many questions around all of this. And, time is an illusion as we understand anyway. And I think once we get into all of these mismatched calendars, and I also work a lot with my partner with Mayan time, which is on a 1320 time scale. But I think it's fascinating that we have these pieces of our history that were just removed on block and have shifted everything. So I've often wondered, like, energetically speaking, how does or doesn't that fit with the 3D calendar system? Because they don't seem to sit that well anymore side by side. What do you think, Ellen?
Well, there's another aspect to it. As I mentioned, the Celts had a lunar calendar, okay? So, as you know, animals mate by the moon, they give birth by the moon, fish spawn by the moon. They don't have a Roman calendar, they go by the moon.
That's very true, of
So,
course.
so Imbolc, and you can look at your calendar for this year. It's really
Mm.
interesting how this lines up. Imbolc is the first quarter moon of the 5th month. Why is it the 5th month? Because Samhain is the start of the year, and November is the 1st month, December is the 2nd month. Wait a minute, is it the 5th month or the 4th month? Now I'm getting confused.
It's the 4th month. I
It's the
think it's
4th
the
month,
4th month.
sorry.
Yeah,
It's
that's
the
okay.
first quarter moon of the 4th month.
Right.
So it's not even Imbolc yet. The first quarter is on the 16th.
Right. And you know what's also fascinating? I have my my astro diary here, and I'm looking on February the 15th, and I mark everything out ahead of time. And this February the 15th is the beginning of another 13-day Mayan wave spell. And this one, interestingly, is starting with the glyph of the white magnetic mirror, which is all about the moon, lunar energy. And what I find is really, really fascinating is how often these potent Mayan days actually align with Western Gregorian power days. And you'd think that how is that possible across time and space that these things from different cultures can actually still make sense together on top of each other? And yet I find over and over and over again that this is the truth. And I just think that I'm just looking at my diary and seeing again that this is true. So
the Mayans had the same cosmology. They had the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world.
right.
And it's the same, and they had the world tree, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I think what we're tapping into here really is the real essence of what these festivals are about, which is energetic and to do with the astrology, and much less to do with calendar acts that were only introduced a couple of hundred years ago. But I'm looking at 1750 and thinking that's also around the time that Pluto, that would have been almost a full Pluto cycle back, as Pluto was entering Aquarius roughly around the same time. So another interesting loop and cycle there, I think.
So if you're trying to figure out when to celebrate, okay, so Imbolc
Yeah.
is the first quarter moon, or I think we've just decided the 4th month. But it varies from year to year. But the nice thing is the winter solstice is always in the 2nd month. So you can always go from there.
Right.
So then Beltane or Bealtaine May Day is at the full moon, which makes a lot of sense because it's all about partying and sap rising and sex and fertility, and it's the full moon, right? Lunasa is the 3rd quarter moon because now the year is starting to go down to the dark, and Samhain is at the dark of the moon. So
Right.
if you really want the energy of Samhain, you have to go at the dark of the moon.
Well, it's interesting because last year, because my birthday is October the 28th, and we had a full moon on that day. So it's almost like a complete flip of Samhain being the 31st of October in general. But if we were to take it that way, that would mean that the next new moon would have been 2 weeks later, which would have again almost been the middle of November, right?
Right, November 11.
Right.
That's I think whoever decided that Armistice Day or Veterans Day was supposed to be November 11, right? I think they knew exactly what they were doing because that's when you honor the dead.
It is, right? Of course it is. Wow, all the pieces are fitting together.
Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. And I mean, I like to feel everything in my system, and because I'm also a herbalist, I tend to look outside and judge things by when the plants are reappearing. And sometimes the snowdrops have already appeared by the 1st of February. And in some years in Wales, when I was living there, they didn't even come out until the last week of February. So that speaks to me not just of the astrological conditions, but also the atmospheric conditions on the planet, which interestingly are often informed by the solar, lunar, and planetary activities.
Yeah.
So basically what we're understanding is that we've got a whole bunch of information that has confused the hell out of us probably for the last couple of thousand years, and we're only now starting to make sense of it, even in the last week or so by the sound of it.
We're just trying to remember what was taken away. We're trying to remember what was lost.
Right.
The indigenous practices that were connected to the land. We're reclaiming those. And it's hard, you know, because our whole culture is going the other direction. But if you're you know, we are the people of the earth, you know, we're trying to get back in sync with the moon and with the land and with the water and with the fire and with the air, you know. It's a whole different pursuit, you know.
It really is.
But anyway, there's more to Imbolc. I just
Yes,
want to
go ahead.
mention a couple of a very interesting aspect of Imbolc, which is very unusual for modern people, is when the bridjog, or the little bride doll, was carried around the village. It was often carried by girls. So it was actually a festival for girls. These days in Ireland, it's usually biddy boys. You see boys, but back in the day, it would have been girls. And the doll would have been decorated with cloth, flowers, shells, and crystals. The girls would sing to Bridget, the goddess Bridget, as they processed through the town. Every girl dressed in white with her hair unbound. And at each house that they went to, they were given food and decorations to add to the bride doll. At the last house, the girls would put Bridget to bed. We talked about the Bridget's bed. They would have a party, and then young men would come to the house. They would honor the doll, the bride doll, and dance with the girls. And sometimes it was a live girl who took the place of Bridget, going from house to house. So that's kind of an interesting thing. We do not have a girls' festival in our modern culture. We do not have one. And I mean, Native American customs, they will honor young women, but our modern Western white Anglo culture has nothing like this. So basically, you're honoring the young girls who are the carriers of the future of the tribe, the fertility of the tribe and the future. And I just think that's fascinating, you know, that we've lost that. So anyway, that's what else can I, and then there's a whole different side. If you look at the literature, you'll read that Imbolc is a festival of purification. And how is purification related to all of this? Well, first of all, Imbolc is a traditional time to do house cleaning, what we call spring cleaning, including cleaning out the ashes of the fireplace. And there's an old poem called the Hibernica Minora. It's an old Irish poem. It states that at Imbolc it is proper to wash the hands, the feet, and the head, which kind of implies a kind of ritual cleansing or ablution. And then there's also an emotional cleansing. And this is something that I only learned a few years ago from an Irish Druid named Emer Clougherty. And she described a ritual that she called the ritual of the dying ember. And I haven't seen this in any of the literature, but this was something that she did with her family. So I found it very interesting, and I thought I would just read to you her description of how they did this, because this is another very different aspect. At the end of winter, the first quarter moon, all the women come to the house and put their baskets of food in the scullery. They sit and knit. The door is left open and the sun sets. No lights are kindled and the fire is left to die down. As the room darkens, the women's chatter turns to stories of sadness, anger, and grief. And I always think of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, for example. You know, the sadness and the grief that is still carried by the people. Emer's grandmother begins to sing songs of mourning, and all the women join in. The fire goes dark. Emer's aunt takes her by the hand. Now, Emmer was a little girl at this time. She was about 4 or 5 years old. Emmer's aunt takes her by the hand and leads her to the well outside. They draw water. A cup of water is given to Emmer to take carefully back to the house. She uses the cup of water to wash her grandmother's tears. Her aunt hands her a candle, and her grandmother uses the last hot ember from the dying fire to light the candle. Her aunt puts the lit candle on the table. The fireplace is fully cleaned, the only time this is done all year. A new fire is prepared and lit in the fireplace from the candle, and all other candles are lit from that fireplace. A celebration with feasting is held, and this was called the highest ritual. It was Imbolc. And the men, what's really interesting, this was a women's thing again. The men would stand outside of the house in a circle around the house. And what they were doing is they were protecting the women so the women could safely release and let go of their grief. And so the men are allowing the women to channel the grief by creating a perfectly safe space, a protected space where the women can do that. And this is why women in Ireland do the keening at the funerals. It's the responsibility of women to cry, to mourn, but the responsibility of the men is to make sure that the women have a safe space to do the keening. So both are part of this.
Wow, isn't that, I mean, first of all, it's so logical and makes so much sense. I have been to a keening before, obviously coming from an Irish background. And it's kind of interesting that the ancestors had all of these mechanisms, Ellen, that we don't have anymore. And as a consequence, we as a Western culture, certainly in Britain, I would say, struggle to release grief. It's something that people hang on to because they don't know how to release. And, you know, of course, crying is a big part of an energetic, emotional release. And it's cathartic. We need to release those energies. Otherwise, if we carry them moving forwards, they can make us sick. But I think it's beautiful that in those old days that the men also had the role that is sadly missing, I feel, in many parts of our culture and modern society, which is to protect the women whilst they're doing this work. You know, there is a reason that there are male and female genders and that we have, you know, different roles. And of course, we live in a world where all of that is very much under scrutiny and question right now. And we're being told that those roles should be flipped. But energetically, there's a reason why the ancestors did it that way and why everything was set up that way, because it makes sense. And I think that's really beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it's beautiful that they had an actual ritual that they could do every year. So they're reinforcing the idea that it's okay to let go. It's okay to collapse, you know, and just let it all out. And that's why Imbolc, it's a feast of purification. That's part of it.
And perhaps that's subconsciously another reason why I wanted to focus so heavily on Imbolc this year. I mean, I love all of the festivals in the Celtic traditions. The one that most people generally tend to forget is Lunasa or Lammas, which is the harvest festival. But Imbolc also, everyone knows about Halloween, and a lot of people know about Beltane or Beltane. But Imbolc and Lunasa often get overlooked. And I think that's really a shame, because this is such a potent point of the year as we're moving towards the spring equinox, and of course the fertility festival that is Beltane and the Hawthorn and all of the May Queen goddess energy. But this one, as you just said, is like, and what you've just shared with me actually makes me think about the process that humanity might have to go through in 2024, which is the releasing of a lot of grief, a lot of emotions, and not having the mechanisms, not knowing how to work with the fire to purify and release, and perhaps being attached to many things, including loss, or maybe information is going to come that is going to unsettle people a little bit, and they're going to have to let go of their belief systems, all of which can be very, very painful if you've been holding on to them for 20, 30, 40, or 50, or even more years. So what I also want to ask you, though, is they only clean the fireplace once a year. Is that correct? They didn't, because I know that the hearth fairies tend to be a little funny if you don't clean the hearth regularly. And I've had that experience with those little munchkins. So I tend to clean my hearth more than once a year, but I'd love your opinion.
Well, that was according to Aimer, okay?
Ah.
I mean, there's another tradition at Beltane or Bealtaine, May Day, where people would douse the fire, and then the runners would go to Ishna, which is the exact geographic center of Ireland, which was the home of the perpetual fire of the Archdruid. And the runners would dip their torches into the fire, and they would carry the fire back to each province. So every province had the same fire, and it would just go from village to village to village. And then they would relight a new fire from that central fire. So that was a whole other, but that's thousands of years ago.
Well, in Ireland to this day, they still have big festivals on Ishnock, and it is a fire festival, as indeed are all of the cross-border
Well, it
festivals.
just came back though. The Ishna festival has only come back in the last decade.
Is
Because,
that right? I mean, I have friends who've been the masters of ceremonies of that. I thought
yeah,
that in certain parts of Ireland, maybe more down in West Cork and the western places, that the original Druid lineages were still observing these fire festivals, the old hedge druids and all of that stuff that somehow managed to survive the modern era in Ireland, especially. But maybe, yeah, you're probably correct that this is only, like many things, actually. I mean, coming from a mixed Irish Cornish background, one of the things that's been very much in my awareness over the years, coming from that perspective, is just how much the Cornish had lost their Celticness. Their language had almost completely gone. They've nearly lost all of their traditional songs, have all been replaced by a Wesleyan or Christian songs. But what I've seen in the last decade or so is a rejuvenation.
well, people were lighting bonfires in Ireland. They never stopped doing that. But the actual fire festival at Ishna, which is a very important sacred site, which is the home of the Archdruid, I mean, for thousands of years, that was the site of the perpetual fire of the Archdruid. The Fire Eye Festival, they call it. That one has really only come back in the last decade or so. And it's really big now. With the last one, there were at least 5,000 people there. And, it used to just be a park where people would go and picnic. I mean, there's a lot that happened there. It's a very important site. And Irish politicians from the time of the revolution and so on spoke there, and it's a big deal. But the big central fire festival really only came back in the last 10 maybe 15 years or so, because I've watched it. It didn't exist, and I've watched it come back, and each year it gets bigger. And the Taoiseach of Ireland even went there to take part, which is amazing. That would be like Biden or Obama showing up at a pagan ritual, it's like that was really something.
That is really something, and I think it's really good that even if some of these things are coming through in a more modern affectation and maybe not exactly the way that they were done by the ancestors, I think it's really important that many indigenous cultures are remembering these festivals that they have for themselves and remembering the importance of them, whether it's Celtic, whether it's Norse, whether it's First Nations. We are all indigenous people, Ellen, and I think that sometimes us Europeans have forgotten that because we got so used to becoming in the role of the colonizer that we forget that in many parts of Europe that we were also colonized, particularly the Celtic cultures. And so my indigenous nature is very much of Celtic and Norse backgrounds because that's the energy of my lands. And I think that that's something for all of us to remember. And that's partly what I love about Druidry really is that it reminds us that we can all have that sense of innate connection to the land and to the goddess.
I wanted to just mention, if we have time, there's certain plants that are sacred to Bridget. So
Absolutely.
if you're doing plant magic or plant spirit medicine, there are certain things. You mentioned snowdrops, of course. Those are associated with the beginning of spring. Snowdrops won't appear here for a few more months, but in Ireland and Britain, it's a whole different story. But blackberry is very sacred to Bridget because it heals burns. And remember, Bridget is a triple goddess. of healing, smithcraft, and poetry. And the blackberry in particular is sacred to her because you can make a poultice with the leaves and it will take the sting or the burn out of the burn. It's good for other things too. The root is good for diarrhea and stuff like that. But the main thing is the burns. Dandelion is sacred to Bridget because it has a milky sap and a yellow flower. So the yellow flower is solar. The milky sap is like the milk of the sheep, you know, the ewes that's coming back. Colt's foot is another plant sacred to her because it's called Filium ante pater, the son before the father. And it blooms with a yellow, it looks kind of like a dandelion a little bit, but it's just a flower with no leaves. Dandelion, you get the leaves and the flowers. Colt's foot, it's really strange. It puts out the flower, but no leaves. And then later the leaves come after the flower is gone. So that's why it's called Filium ante pater. Snowdrops we talked about. Crocus, which is another really early flower. Trillium or Beth root, which has 3 leaves and 3 petals. And that's the triple goddess, you know, Bridget, Bridget, and Bridget. Oak trees are sacred to her because it makes firewood, a very hot firewood, and also it attracts lightning, which has to do with celestial fire. Oats are sacred to her because oats have a milky sap when you pick them, when you first pick them when they're fresh. Chamomile, which makes a yellow tea. Broom flowers, which are yellow, which they're diuretic and cathartic for edema. And then wood sorrel, which is shamrock, which is anti-diarrheal, refrigerant, makes a poultice for wounds, and so on and so forth. And of course, rushes, which are what you traditionally use to make the Bridget's cross. But I do have, I should mention the books.
Yes, please do. Absolutely.
This
I want our audience to tune into this. It's a great book. I had it for a while.
this book has been out. This was my second book that I wrote. But there's a whole chapter in here about Imbolc. And what I've just told you today, most of it is not in this book. There's other stuff in this book, but obviously I've been a Druid since 1984, so I'm always learning. But this book has all of the major festivals, Imbolc, May Day, you know, solstices, equinoxes, Lunasa, Samhain, all in here. And then it has house blessings, child blessings, hand fastings, funerals, and then plant spirit medicine. There's a whole bunch if you want to work magically with plants. Astrology, herbal astrology, you know, that's in there. And then I mean, I have, like I said, about 16 books in print, but this one, Once Around the Sun, Stories, Crafts, and Recipes to Celebrate the Sacred Earth Year. This was designed specifically for, what I was thinking was families. This is Bridget, young Bridget. So
Wonderful.
all the holidays are in here with a story that you can read out loud, a traditional dish that you can make. So you can eat the food of the festival, you can read a story about the festival, and then a craft. So for example, for Imbolc, there's step-by-step instructions on how to make a Bridget's cross, you know.
Wonderful.
But it goes through the entire wheel of the year. And there's Manannán Mac Lir.
Manannán Mac Lir is one of my biggest allies. I've been working with him for a very, very long time. And if you go to the Isle of Man, I can honestly say, and have you been to the Isle of Man? I think
I have not.
probably. Oh, wow.
No.
Well, I can honestly say if you ever get to go to the Isle of Man, or any of our listeners ever go, it's one of the few places I've ever been in Britain, certainly, but probably in the world where I felt the presence of a deity, of the power and energy of Manannán Mac Lir everywhere on the island. The guy was watching me the whole time, which was not that much of a surprise because I've been calling him into my circles for a very, very long time. But to actually go to the Isle of Man and experience the energy of tin and oak, which is really what I think the Isle of Man is, the locals even recognize there is a special weather called Manannan's Mist. And when the mist comes down on the island, you cannot get on or off the island, which is a little bit like the Irish weather in some ways, but obviously Ireland's a much bigger island than the Isle of Man. And the Isle of Man is actually laid out exactly the same way as Ireland. So in the way that you have Ishnock and the Hill of Tara and the County Meath as the sacred centre, you also have the original Tynwald in the middle of the Isle of Man, and the rest of the island is divided into 4 quarters, the same as Ireland is. And as I understand it, but you probably know better, this actually relates back to the same pattern of Atlantis. And some commentators, maybe rightly or wrongly, have said that that original design was being passed down from that period to our Celtic Druidic ancestors, and they remembered the point of the sacred centre and the 4 quarters. So I don't know what you think about that, but it's just an interesting idea. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The symbol of the Isle of Man is the 3-legged
Skull.
Yeah, what is that? I mean, what would they say? What would the people on the Isle of Man say that was?
Well, I asked that specific question because one of my own teachers is a wizard from the Isle of Man, the wonderful Davyd Leasley, who was originally initiated in Vanuatu. But I went to the Isle of Man for my magic training with him many years ago and visited all of these places. And I asked him, I said, it looks like a Triskel, but it's kind of wonky somehow. And he said, well, that's just because they've messed with it. He said, originally it is meant to be a Triskel. And when he went to Vanuatu, he had a flag with him. It's all in his book, The White Serpent. I highly recommend reading it. And one of the preconditions that he was recognized by the tribal leader as the tribal leader's long lost brother was that he came from a land where the flag of the land was a Triskel.
Okay.
And lo and behold, Davyd actually had a flag in his bag and pulled it out, and all of the Vanuatu locals like, oh my God, like this must be it. And there's a whole series more things that Davyd had to tick the boxes of before the tribe actually officially recognized him. But then he had to go through a whole series of initiations of having his arms and legs tattooed with tribal markings. And he's a tall, like 6'4" white guy, originally from the Isle of Man, but spent time in Polynesia, and so he said yes, as he understands it, that it is really again just recognizing the triple aspect of the goddess as I remember it, but it sort of had been created into this 3 legs of Manannan or something. I need to check the details again. You caught me on the hop here. But yeah, that's
3 legs, which I always thought was really strange, but in Celtic thinking, the Triskel is triple deity because all the high gods, Lu was born of triplets, Bridget is Bridget, and Bridget, the Morrigan is a triple goddess. The high gods are all triple. That's how you know it's a high god. And it's also land, sea, and sky. Those are the 3 realms, which the Mayans also recognize.
Right. I mean, it's the sacred number of the goddess also, right? The number 3, the triple aspect, the 3 Norns, the 3 witches that sit at the bottom of Yggdrasil, past, present, and future, the 3 fates. Of course, it's also Virgin, Mother, and Crone. So we see this energy repeating time and time again. And so I think originally the energy was of a red Triskel on the grey background. But that's going way back into antiquity. And if you go to the Isle of Man, what's really beautiful about it, particularly on the western side of the island, where is Peel Castle, where Manannan's supposedly buried, is that all of the shops are still written in Manx Gaelic. All of the names, there's still a very few number of people who speak Manx on the island. It's a little bit like Cornwall in that regard. It almost lost its culture and its identity completely. But you go to the western side of the island and it's like stepping back into Ireland in the 70s or the 80s. You see these very old traditional shop fronts, all written in Gaelic. And it's like, wow, it's literally like stepping back into the past. So if any of you are listening out there and very interested in Celtic Druidic culture and history, I would say that the Isle of Man is one of the places where it has, at least energetically, perpetuated under the guise and gaze of Manannan MacLear for a very long time. Beautiful place, and definitely recommend it. So we went off on a little bit of a tangent away from Imbolc there, but still very much in the Druidic world. Do you have any final thoughts, Ellen, to share with our audience about the year ahead and how perhaps you would suggest that they take these energies of Imbolc forwards with them to really maximize and expand into the potential that they offer at this time?
Well, the light is returning. And oh, here comes This is my cat, Bridget.
I've got the same issue. I've got my cat has snuck in somehow through a door that I don't think is meant to be open, and she's
Yeah,
trying
I kept
to get into
pushing
my
her
knee.
away, but she insisted. Well, oh, there's something I forgot to mention, the Bridget's girdle.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, this is, I just did a ritual with about 30 people, I think, where everybody got reborn. You pass this over you like this, and you step through it and you get reborn in the goddess. But
Aye, get
yeah,
it.
this is a time of rebirth. The light is returning. We all feel better because the light is getting stronger. And as I said, I was a seer for a ritual, and what I saw was the yew tree. So something very ancient is coming back. But it's an ancient cycle that keeps happening. So pay attention to that. Something old is coming back.
It
So
reminds me, when you say that, it makes me think of the past future technologies. It's like we have this idea that our ancestors somehow were primitive or something. And of course, I think many of us understand increasingly that that's not really the true. And perhaps we're more primitive than our ancestors were. So I would like to suggest that what is coming back is a remembrance, first of all, of our innate connection to Mother Earth and Gaia, as she is currently going through her own transformational processes. And also of a remembrance of who we are as beings, Ellen. I think that we have become accustomed to seeing ourselves in a much diminished form. And actually, the truth is, at a soul level, at a higher level, at a multidimensional level, we're so much bigger than we are. And of course, the yew tree as the tree of eternity. I spent many years studying with the yew tree shaman, Michael Dunning, who actually lives up in your part of the world in Western Massachusetts. And you know what I can say about working with that tree, of course, is that it connects into the Akashic records and remembers everything about us. It knows everything about who we are, about humanity. It's seen it all. It's been on planet Earth apparently for 250 million years. It's the longest living being on planet Earth, which is why it's called the Tree of Eternity. It has many names, in fact, of course. But I would like to second that. I think that that's a very clear message that is coming to us from the earth, from the tree beings, from our druidic ancestors who were deeply connected, of course, to the earth, to remind us that we need to reconnect with ourselves. And in doing so, of course, we can reconnect with nature, or even the other way around. We can reconnect with ourselves through reconnecting with nature. And I think that this is really, really important, because when we get disconnected from our environment, that leads to all of the degradation that we have been witnessing over the last 30, 40, 100, 200 years to the planet. So I love that. And I think that that's a really powerful motif for us all to hold in our hearts this spring as we move forwards. So today has been a wonderful chance to hear about all of this. We certainly from my side had a few technical difficulties, so hopefully that all comes out good at the end. But I want to thank you, Ellen, for sharing your wisdom and helping to hold this space at this time of year and sharing all of those beautiful things that you've shared today, and hopefully inspired our listeners to get involved in the energy. We're still in the energy of Imbolc, thank goodness. With Ellen's reappraisal of the times and dates, we're absolutely in the space of the energy of Imbolc. And of course, lambing season is taking place. And in my own homeland of Wales, lambing season was a big deal. I lived in a very rural part of Wales where the lambs would suddenly appear around about this time of year, and it would always remind me of that energy of life-giving. And I think that this is a chance for us to all reimagine and rebirth ourselves in 2024 with these energies. And of course, by giving it focus, by making the corn crosses and dolls there, we're giving focus to our intentions and our attention. So wonderful, wonderful stuff. Please do check out Ellen's books, everybody. Highly recommend them. And I think they're a wonderful reference guide for remembering how to do these different practices that Ellen shared today. And they give us the opportunity also to share with our children and help them remember things that perhaps have not been taught in schools. I don't remember being taught any of this in school personally, and I'm sure they're still not. Unless you were lucky enough to go to an Irish Druid hedge school in the last 100 years, which is probably not that many of us. We probably have not been taught this at school. So that's one of my prayers for this upcoming new moon. Also at this time, to hope that humanity remembers all of these things. I think it's so, so important. So thank you for all of your work, your long years as a Druid leader, That's 30 years. That's actually, they say that it was 10 years to be a bard, 10 years to be an ovate, and 10 years to be a druid. So I feel like you've done more than your service for the druidic community. So blessings to you for that. And of course, please tell everybody again your websites. I will put them in the show notes, but if people want to link with you.
It's just elleneverthopman.com. And if you want to study Druidism, it's tribeoftheoak.org.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much again, Ellen. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hope you've found this as inspiring as I have. And hopefully we'll see you all again very soon for another edition of Quantum Connections here on QPW. Bye for now.